The truth is, I am very afraid that they will return us to our country, and I do not know what will happen to us there, she said. The fast-track docket is part of Biden's humane asylum system, which has included few other detailed plans, save for a proposal to use asylum officers at the border to decide cases instead of judges. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, in an emailed statement this week, maintained the dedicated docket provides fair hearings for families seeking asylum. He noted that the Justice Department is working to provide families legal orientation services and referrals to pro bono lawyers, an improvement over prior rocket docket efforts. The goal of this process is to ensure that individuals who merit protection do not have to wait for years to get it, and that those who are ineligible for protection are quickly returned to their countries, Mayorkas said. Teresa Cardinal Brown, a managing director at the Bipartisan Policy Center, said she's skeptical unless the effort gets more resources. You're still asking immigration judges who have a regular docket to also do this, said Brown, who recommends new positions to fund border courts that would aim to decide cases in 6 months. You haven't expanded capacity at all. Neptali Chelusia, 47, crossed the border in June in Arizona and was detained for a week with his 14-year-old son, leaving behind his wife and 3 other children in Ecuador. The son returned in August because Chelusia had to work and couldn't find a nearby school with space. Chelusia, who rents a room for $800 in a Bronx apartment he shares with other Ecuadorian families, was a boiler specialist for the Army and found a similar job at New York construction sites. He acknowledges coming for economic reasons and wonders if he has any options for temporary legal status. The U.S. needs workers, so policies should be less harsh with us, he said. We come to work. A judge told him last month to return to court in November. So it's, there are lots of reasons why people are here and why they come here, and our system is broken. Now, what can I say? I've said this many times before. Other people have said it. You've heard it a lot. Stories like this help us understand what is broken about the system. It's broken in basically 3 ways, I would say. First is the laws themselves, just literally the words that are on paper. Those laws were designed at different times for different reasons, and they all are just sort of jumbled together as if they make sense as a whole, when in fact they don't. Portions of them may make sense or may have made sense at one time based on certain conditions, but they now all still apply, and they still all apply together. So they don't all work well together. Various aspects of them would be fine by themselves, but don't work together. For example, in this instance, you have judges who, we have this idea like, okay, let's get them relief quickly. That's an idea. It makes sense if you look at things a certain way. But you assign this to judges who are working on thousands of other cases, and you end up with a situation that just doesn't work. So you can point to various aspects of the immigration system, and you can see that in any number of cases. So, we have laws that don't work. We have, how can I put this gently, disingenuous politicians who push back against things or push for things that are unnecessary based on how it looks to their constituents. So they're trying to present a public image. Oh, I'm tough on immigration. So what does being tough on immigration mean? Well, for a lot of people, it means greater enforcement. Like every time you have an immigration bill that comes up, you have Republicans saying, we need more money in enforcement, more enforcement, more enforcement. So you endlessly have money being poured into doing something that doesn't necessarily need doing, or it doesn't need doing in that way, or it could be handled in a different way. It's the same thing with the policing situation. For example, you hear people say, let's defund the police. And other people are like, what? And leave ourselves at mercy to the criminals? No. Let's stop pouring money into policing and put more money into other ways of dealing with social problems so that less policing needs to be done, and less problems result because of that. Because right now, police are social workers, they are psychiatrists, they're enforcers of laws, they're solvers of domestic disputes. I mean, they have so much stuff dumped on their platter, and it's just like, okay, figure it out. You do it. You got a gun. Go out there and do something. So they do, and they end up shooting a lot of people that should not be shot because of that. And you can be pro-police all you want, but you cannot honestly deny that that is what is happening all over the place. Police are being put in situations they don't understand, don't know how to deal with, and they deal with it badly. And so it's the same problem with these immigration laws. It's like, let's just keep putting money into things that make us seem tough on immigration. And they don't solve any problems. They pay a lot of contractors a lot of money to do stuff that we don't need. The whole border wall fiasco was a perfect example of this. We have miles of border wall on the southern border now that people can just go around or go over or go through. It was total waste of money and total waste of time. It was a big public image event, idea, and it is doing nothing but wasting a lot of money and then wasting a lot of time. So that's another reason. And then finally, you have people that just plain are, the public who is just plain dishonest about immigrants. And you have people making a living, literally making a living, radio hosts, TV pundits, podcasters, whoever, on bashing immigrants because they can make money off of it. It's a tried and true technique. Let's blame everything on them. You're fine. You're great. Your life would be wonderful if it weren't for them. Ignoring everything about why these people might feel like their lives aren't so good, and the fact that they have nothing to do with it. So there's all sorts of things that work together to make our immigration situation what we call broken. It is broken. It is a broken system. Our efforts to deal with it are broken. Everything about it is broken. Broken. Okay. I think I've made my point. If not, then ask me and I'll make it again. And I'll use the word broken some more. Okay. That was just stupid, but I said it anyway. All right. So this is kind of a weird, story. At least it sounds like a weird title for a story that includes immigration, but immigration is indeed embedded in this story. The story's title is Climate Denial is Waning on the Right. What's replacing it might be just as scary. Standing in front of the partial ruins of Rome's Colosseum, Boris Johnson explained that a motive to tackle the climate crisis could be found in the fall of the Roman Empire. Then as now, he argued, the collapse of civilization hinged on the weakness of its borders. When the Roman Empire fell, it was largely as a result of uncontrolled immigration. The empire could no longer control its borders. People came in from the east and all over the place, the British Prime Minister said in an interview on the eve of crucial UN climate talks in Scotland. Civilization can go into reverse as well as forwards, as Johnson told it, with Rome's fate offering grave warnings as to what could happen if global heating is not restrained. This wrapping of ecological disaster with fears of rampant immigration is a narrative that has flourished in the far-right fringe movements in Europe and the U.S. and is now spilling into the discourse of mainstream politics. Whatever his intent, Johnson was following a current of right-wing thought that has shifted from outright dismissal of climate change to using its impacts to fortify ideological and often racist battle lines. Representatives of this line of thought around the world are in many cases echoing eco-fascist ideas that themselves are rooted in an earlier age of blood and soil nationalism. In the U.S., a lawsuit by the Republican Attorneys General of Arizona has demanded the building of a border wall, remember me mentioning this, to prevent migrants coming from Mexico as the people directly result in the release of pollutants, carbon dioxide, and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. What? Let me say that again. In the U.S., a lawsuit by the Republican Attorneys General of Arizona has demanded the building of a border wall to prevent migrants coming from Mexico, as these people, quote, directly result in the release of pollutants, carbon dioxide, and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, end quote. Is this something about Mexicans that I don't know? Mexicans are releasing pollutants? Is nobody else is doing this? It's just Mexican? That's insane. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. That's actually insane. All right, but it goes on. In Spain, Santiago Abascal, leader of the populist Vox Party, has called for a patriotic restoration of a green Spain, clean and prosperous. In the UK, the far-right British National Party has claimed to be the only true Green Party in the country due to its focus on migration. And in Germany, the right-wing populist party Alternative for Germany has tweaked some of its earlier mockery of climate science with a platform that warns harsh climatic conditions in Africa and the Middle East will see a gigantic mass migration towards European countries requiring toughened borders. Meanwhile, France's National Front, once a bastion of derisive climate denial, has founded a green wing called New Ecology, with Marine Le Pen, president of the party, vowing to create the world's leading ecological civilization with a focus on locally grown foods. Quote, environmentalism is the natural child of patriotism because it's the natural child of rootedness, Le Pen said in 2019, adding that if you're a nomad, you're not an environmentalist. Those who are nomadic do not care about the environment. They have no homeland. Le Pen's ally Hervé Juvin, a National Rally MEP, is seen as an influential figure on the European right in promoting what he calls nationalistic green localism. Simply ignoring or disparaging the science isn't the effective political weapon it once was. We are seeing very, very little climate denialism in conversations on the right now, says Catherine Fieschi, a political analyst and founder of Counterpoint, who tracks trends in populist discourse. But in place of denial is a growing strain of environmental populism that has attempted to dovetail public alarm over the climate crisis with disdain for ruling elites, longing for more traditional embrace of nature and kin, and calls to banish immigrants behind strong borders. Millions of people who are already being displaced from their homes, predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, due to disasters worsened by climate change, such as flooding, storms, and wildfires. In August, the United Nations said Madagascar was on the brink of the world's first climate change famine. The number of people uprooted around the world will balloon further to as many as 1.2 billion by 2050 by some estimates. And while most will move within their own countries, many millions are expected to seek refuge across borders. This mass upending of lives is set to cause internal and external conflict that the Pentagon, among others, has warned will escalate into violence. The response to this trend on the right has led to what academics Joe Turner and Dan Bailey called eco-bordering, where restrictions on immigration are seen as vital to protect the nativist stewardship of nature, and where the ills of environmental destruction are laid upon those from developing countries, ignoring the far larger consumptive habits of wealthy nations. In an analysis of 22 far-right parties in Europe, the academics found this thinking is rife among right-wing parties and portrays effects as causes and further normalizes racist border practices and colonial amnesia within Europe. Turner, an expert in politics and migration at the University of York, said the link between climate and migration is an easy logic for politicians, such as Johnson, as it plays into long-standing tropes on the right that overpopulation in poorer countries is a leading cause of environmental harm. More broadly, it is an attempt by the right to seize the initiative on environmental issues that have for so long been the preserve of center-left parties and conservationists. The far right in Europe has an anti-immigration platform. That's their bread and butter. So you can see it as an electoral tactic to start talking about green politics, Turner said. Adding that migrants are being blamed in two ways. First, for moving to countries with higher emissions and then adding to those emissions, as right-wing figures in Arizona have claimed. And secondly, for supposedly bringing destructive polluting habits with them from their countries of origin. A mixture of this Malthusian and ethno-nationalist thinking is being distilled into political campaigning, as is in a political pamphlet described in Turner and Bailey's research paper from SVP, the largest party in Switzerland's Federal Assembly, which shows a city crowded by people and cars belching out pollution with a tagline that translates to "Stop Massive Immigration." A separate campaign ad by SVP claims that 1 million migrants will result in thousands of miles of new roads, and that anyone who wants to protect the environment in Switzerland must fight against mass immigration. The far right depicts migrants as being essentially poor custodians of their own lands and then treating European nature badly as well, Turner said. So you get these headlines around asylum seekers eating swans, all these ridiculous scaremongering tactics. But they play into this idea that by stopping immigrants coming here, you are actually supporting a green project. Experts are clear that the main instigators of the climate crisis are wealthy people in wealthy countries. The richest 1% of the world's population were responsible for the emissions of more than twice as much carbon dioxide as the poorer half of the world from 1990 to 2015, research has found. With people in the U.S. causing the highest level of per capita emissions in the world. Adding new arrivals to high-emitting countries doesn't radically ramp up these emissions at the same rate. A study by Utah State University found that immigrants are typically using less energy, driving less, and generating less waste than native-born Americans. Still, the idea of personal sacrifice is hard for many to swallow. While there is strengthening acceptance of climate science among the public, and a restlessness that governments have done so little to constrain global heating, support for climate policies plummets when it comes to measures that involve the taxing of gasoline or other impositions. According to a research paper co-authored by Feishi, this has led to a situation where detractors are taking up the language of freedom fighters. We are seeing the growth of accusations of climate hysteria as a way for elites to exploit ordinary people, Feishi said. The solutions that are talked about involve spending more money on deserving Americans and deserving Germans and so on, and less on refugees. It's, yes, we will need to protect people, but let's protect our people. This backlash is visible in protest movements such as the Gilets jaunes, yellow vests in France. I pronounced that badly. Gilets jaunes. I don't know, which became the longest-running protest movement in the country since the Second World War by railing against, among other things, a carbon tax placed on fuel. online favored targets such as Greta Thunberg or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have been shown in memes as Nazis or devils intent on impoverishing Western civilization through their supposedly radical ideas to combat climate change. Fishy said that the right's interaction with climate is far more than just about borders. It is animating fears that personal freedoms are under attack from a cosseted liberal elite. I can't talk. You see these quite obvious populist arguments in the U.S. and Europe that a corrupt elite, the media and government, have no idea what ordinary people's lives are like as they impose these stringent climate policies, said Feishi, whose research has analyzed the climate conversation on the right taking place on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other social media platforms. This sort of online chatter has escalated since the COVID-19 pandemic started, and it is being fed along a line of influence that begins with small conspiratorial right-wing groups spreading messages that are then picked up by what she calls middle-of-the-tail figures with thousands of followers, and then in turn disseminated by large influencers and into mainstream center-right politics. There are these conspiratorial accusations that COVID is a dry run for restrictions that governments want to impose with the climate emergency, that we need to fight for our freedoms on wearing masks and all these climate rules, Feishi said. There is a yearning for pre-COVID life and a feeling climate policies will just cause more suffering. What's worrying, Feishi continued, is that more reasonable parts of the right, mainstream conservatives and Republicans are being drawn into this. They will say that they don't deny climate change, but then tap into these ideas. She said center-right French politicians have started disparaging climate activists as miserables, where Armin Laschet, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union, who sought to succeed Angela Merkel, has said Germany should focus on its own industry and people in the face of cascading global crises. The interplay between environmentalism and racism has some of its deepest roots in the U.S., where some of the conservation, The interplay between environmentalism and racism has some of its deepest roots in the U.S., where some of the conservation movement's totemic figures of the past embraced views widely regarded as aberrant today. Wilderness was something viewed in the 19th century as bound in rugged and exclusively white masculinity, and manifest destiny demanded the expansion of a secure frontier. John Muir, known as the father of national parks in the U.S., described Native Americans as dirty and said they seemed to have no right place in the landscape. Madison Grant, a leading figure in the protection of the American bison and the establishment of Glacier National Park, was an avowed eugenicist who argued for inferior races to be placed into ghettos, and successfully lobbied for Otabenga, a Congolese man, to be put on display alongside apes at the Bronx Zoo. This focus on racial hierarchies would come to be adopted into the ideology of the Nazis, themselves avowed conservationists. There has been something of a reckoning of this troubling past in recent years. A bronze statue of Theodore Roosevelt on horseback, flanked by a Native American man and an African man, is to be removed from the front of the American Museum of National History in New York, and at least one conservation group named after the slaveholder and anti-abolitionist John James Audubon is changing its name. But elsewhere, themes of harmful overpopulation have been picked up by a resurgent right from a liberal environmental movement that now largely demurs from the topic. Republicans, aware that many of their own younger voters are turned off by the relentless climate denial as they see their futures wreathed in wildfire smoke and floodwater, have sensed an opportunity. The right is reclaiming that older Malthusian population rhetoric and using that as a cudgel in green terms rather than unpopular racist terms, said Blair Taylor, program director of the Institute for Social Ecology, an educational and research body. It's weird that this has become a popular theme in the U.S. West because the West is sparsely populated, and that hasn't slowed environmental destruction, he added. But this is about speaking to nativist fears. It isn't about doing anything to solve the problem. The spearhead for modern nativism in the U.S. is, of course, Donald Trump. Excuse me. The spearhead for modern nativism in the U.S. is, of course, Donald Trump, who has, along with an often dismissive stance towards climate science itself, sought to portray migrants from Mexico and Central America as criminals and animals while vowing to restore clean air and water to deserving American citizens. If there is to be another iteration of a Trump presidency or a successful campaign by one of his acolytes, the scientific denial may be dialed down somewhat while retaining the reflex nativism. The Republican lawsuit in Arizona may be a prelude to an ecological framing of Trump's fetish for border walls should the former president run again for office in 2024, with migrants as the target. We will see weird theories that will spread blame in all the wrong directions, Taylor said. More walls, more borders, more exclusion. That's most likely the way we are heading. A recasting of environmentalism in this way has already branched out in different forms throughout the U.S. right, spanning gun-toting preppers who view nature as a bastion to be defended from interlopers, a back-to-the-land ideology where you are an earner and provider, not a soft-handed soy boy, as Taylor describes it, to the vaguely mystic wellness practitioners who have risen to prominence by spreading false claims over the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. The latter group, Taylor said, includes those who have a fascination with organic farming, Viking culture, extreme conspiracy theories such as the QAnon fantasy, and a rejection of science and reason in favor of discovering an authentic self. These disparate facets are all embodied, he said, in Jake Angeli, the so-called QAnon shaman who was among the rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol on 6 January. Angeli, who became famous for wearing horns and a bearskin headdress during the violent insurrection, was sentenced to 41 months in prison over his role in the riot. He gained media attention for refusing to eat the food served in jail because it was not organic. Angeli, who previously attended a climate march to promote his conspiracy-laden YouTube channel and said he is in favor of cleansed ecosystems, has been described as an eco-fascist, a term that has also been applied to Patrick Crusius, the Dallas man accused of killing 23 people in a mass shooting at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas in 2019. In a document published online shortly before the shooting, Crusius wrote, "The environment is getting worse by the year, so the next logical step is to decrease the number of people in America using resources. If we can get rid of enough people, then our way of life can become more sustainable." The shooting came just a few months after the terrorist massacre of 49 people in 2 mosques in Christchurch in New Zealand, with the perpetrator describing himself as an eco-fascist unhappy with the birth rate of immigrants. Such extreme violent acts erupting from right-wing eco-populist beliefs are still rare, but the alt-right has been adept by taking concerns and making them mainstream, said Taylor. It has fostered the idea that nature is a place of savage survival that brings us back to original society, that nature itself is fascist because there is no equality in nature. That's what they believe. Advocates for those fleeing climate-induced disasters hope there will be a shift in the other direction, with some advocating for a new international refugee framework. The UN Convention on Refugees does not recognize climate change and its effects as a reason for countries to provide shelter to refugees. An escalation in forced displacement from droughts, floods, and other calamities will put further onus on the need for reform. But opening up the conversation for a revamp could see it wound back as much as it could be expanded, given the growing ascendancy of populism and authoritarianism in many countries. Well, I'm sorry, I've run out of time. You have been listening to CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana, 104.5 FM, and I hope we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.